Good morning from Brussels. You know, I always call it the biggest nut asylum in the entire world, and it in fact is. So I'm very delighted. I'm here today with guests. I have Reggie Littlejohn with me. She's the founder and president of Anti-Globalist International. Thanks for being here. Then, of course, we have Andrew Bidgen, a former member of parliament in the UK. Thanks for being here, Andrew.
Great.
And we have Montgomery Toms, who is a very young, by the way, British campaigner who has become a prominent voice against whatever the UK is doing in terms of digital ID. And that will be pretty much our topic today. We will talk about digital ID and how it will inevitably affect all of our lives to a point where they will actually control us via the digital ID. So, thanks for coming, everyone. And yeah, we should just dig right into it. We had a fantastic event last night. It was on digital ID. There were a lot of experts there. Reggie, you spoke on it. Montgomery, you spoke on it too. And you had a brief say in it too. So let's just reflect on that. What did you take away from last night?
I think the worrying thing is that all our governments are in lockstep again, and we know what the last time we were all in lockstep, whether it's about net zero or the pandemic's so-called pandemic response. It's never good for the people, is it?
Yeah.
But this digital ID, it's not just Europe, it's America, it's all of the Anglosphere. They can't bring in Agenda 2030 without digital ID. It's fundamental.
Yeah.
And it's very, very unpopular in the UK. 2/3 of the British public are sceptical or don't want it already. And I think the more they find out about it, the less they're going to like it. But it's clear that our governments are bringing it in by subterfuge.
Yeah.
I'm very concerned about this, protect under 16s from internet content. And what that is going to be is that all the over 16s are going to have digital ID to demonstrate their identity to protect the under 16-year-olds.
Yeah.
It's digital ID compliance by the back door.
It is, yeah. Reggie?
Well, that's one of the pretexts is to protect the young. And there are other pretexts, which are, for example, to fight election fraud or to fight immigration. But all of these are pretexts. So I began my career as a human rights activist fighting coercive population control in China. And that's why I know what Chinese-style tactics are, and I was very concerned to see those being sort of metastasized all over the world during COVID, particularly the COVID pass, the vaccine passport, which can serve as the platform for the China social credit system. This is what people don't realize. They think that it's just sort of a convenience. But what they do is, if you look on the World Economic Forum website, you can see how all the different ways that this is supposed to be deployed. So you will need one to open a bank account, to access government, any kind of government services, to travel, to buy and sell online, to pay your taxes, to vote. And then there's this whole smart cities, smart ghetto association. But if you need a digital ID to access all of those services, that means that you are leaving a digital footprint there, tracking you on all of those services, including social media. And ultimately, what this does is it shuts down free speech.
Exactly.
Because they are tracking everything you say, and if they think that you are saying misinformation or disinformation as they define it, in other words, if you are just a dissenting voice, they can shut you down by shutting you off of social media or even shutting you out of your bank accounts and your credit cards if you keep it up.
Well, there was currently legislation going through Canada, which if it went through, would mean that the government, if you said something the government didn't like, they could shut you off social media and your mobile phone. And if you told anyone what the government had done to you, and you haven't committed a crime, if you told anybody what the government had done to you, then you went to prison because you have committed a crime.
Totally insane.
Yeah, I mean, yesterday was brilliant. I think that one thing that was touched on a lot is, and you just touched on it now, Andrew, is about how we have all the infrastructure available, but it needs to be knitted together in some respect. So as in the UK, in London, we have a surveillance state literally a hair width away from being fully enforced if they had a digital ID. So as I say, I mentioned yesterday, it's not just limited to the digital ID tracking aspect. Obviously, there's the carbon credits and all of that. We've got facial recognition. We have surveillance cameras just everywhere. And if you had a digital ID, it's over. I mean, we've seen the attacks on free speech be inevitable, but with this, it's more than inevitable. It just becomes normality. But there's loads of different other concerning things. Like there's a few things, obviously, I didn't mention yesterday. We have, for example, like the social media ban for under 16s.
Yes.
And that's being championed, right? We need to safeguard children, that's how they're pushing
course.
forward. But how are they going to verify our age, okay? So it's little things like this that it's not actually as forward-facing as just saying, here's a digital ID on your phone. It's like, we're going to sneak it in.
Exactly.
We're going to make it so that you don't have to have one, but we're going to make your life impossible to live live if you don't have one. And this is what they did with the vaccine passports, right? Ultimately, they didn't force us in England, technically. They coerced us. They coerced us, but we did have the ability to say no, but it meant our lives were very limited in our freedom,
So the way they do this is they say, the government says, we're not going to force this on you, but then private companies or even banks or whatever can just say, you have to have this in order to access your bank. So it's enforced not by the government, but through the private sector, and that's how they get away with it.
Exactly. So that's exactly how they do it, right? They not necessarily will force us to have it, but they will create conditions that will inevitably lead that you need to have it in order to even participate in the normal day-to-day life activities, right? Like going to a bank or, wherever, or going shopping, grocery shopping even. So, and what I think is really the way they're doing it, that's so despicable. You touched on that a little bit when you said, it's now they literally pick up cues from the citizens and what they're complaining about, right? Like mass migration, for instance, right? Which at this point you really have to call it an invasion. That's just, the way I see it, and we should call, a spade a spade. So anyway, so they pick up on that. Okay, people want to restrict immigration, right? Well, guess what? We have a solution, and with digital ID, we can do this. We actually will be able to. No, we won't be, because they don't want to. And that is the big difference here. I mean, we have a means now to restrict immigration. We've always had them. They deliberately chose not to enact them. They just dropped the whole topic.
When they talk about using digital ID to prevent illegal migration in the UK, I mean, it's a joke. We have something called national insurance numbers. You can't work in the UK without a national insurance number, and no illegal migrant's going to have a national insurance number. So, I mean, that is absolute.
Not to mention, if you are working illegally, you're not exactly going to go, sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Of
Let me have
course
a digital ID. Yeah.
Of course not. Yeah, but they come up with all kinds of reasons as to why digital ID actually is a good thing, and it's going to improve the quality of our life and convenience, whatever it is they come up with. But like I said, they're turning something they're failing at, like controlling immigration, like actually protecting children from sexual exploitation, right? And they're turning that around. They're not doing anything about these issues per se. They're coming up with what they want anyway.
Well, the answer to any problem we have over the next few years is going to be
more
digital
control.
ID.
Yeah, exactly.
Whatever the problem, the answer will be digital ID. I worry that in my experience, Christine, governments normally demand that you accept what they've done rather than ask permission. I think they've already actually got it, haven't they?
Exactly.
They've got the digital ID. All they've got to do is push it all together in one pot.
Well, that's right. I mean, I feel that the infrastructure for the China social credit system worldwide has already been laid. But they don't want to activate it yet because they're worried that there might be too much resistance.
Exactly.
So they're trying to sell it to people.
Exactly.
We're going to protect the children. We're going to protect the borders. We're going to protect election integrity. Okay.
We're going to save you from robberies because there won't be cash anymore.
Right. Meanwhile, my goodness, if you go online and you look for fraud that has been perpetrated digitally, it's horrible.
Yeah.
It totally does not
Well, these
stop
systems
fraud.
are
Yeah.
they're completely vulnerable to cyber attacks. We've
Oh,
seen.
yes.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Your data, as I mentioned, like I always reiterate this. You know, we have a digital ID in the UK, a form of it, which is one login, which they are phasing 8 million company directors into. You can't run a limited company. You can't be self-employed. Unless you have a one login, and it's just easy, you know, just quickly do a login. But what you don't realise is you're signing into all government and combined into one system. And this, honestly, they've done red team tests. They've sent in friendly hackers to basically see, they test the system basically. They've just got in unnoticed, access to all of our information, but they will never admit how much of a failure that one login is.
It's a
And
total
if you
failure.
don't want to do one login, you can't. It's an utter nightmare.
Exactly.
So that we are dealing with it is exactly
Right.
what I said. We are dealing
Yeah.
with this. You can't live without
Yeah.
it.
You
scenario.
can a bit. About a year ago, I had
Yeah.
to change the address on my driver's license. I moved house.
Yeah.
And it wanted me to go through one login. No one was talking about digital ID, but I could see it was digital ID. So I opted. I said, no, I don't want to do that. But I had to do a round trip of over 20
it's a
miles to
nightmare.
a post office
Yeah.
to do it in person. Not many people are going to be willing to drive 20 miles
Not just but
when they can do it
Yeah,
online
yeah.
and give all their
Yeah,
details.
but
away.
you know
right,
what?
yeah.
Also, an interesting question is, and it's for Richie pretty much. So the idiot Democrats in the United States, right? I was following the debate on, you know, voter ID, you know, whether or not you should have a photo ID to go to cast your vote. And of course, the Democrats, you know, they were arguing, which, by the way, they actually show their true colors there, that they are downright racists.
Right.
When they claimed it would keep black people from participating in the elections because black people don't have ID, right?
That's
ID.
very offensive.
It is, totally. So, but, you know, so in order to cast your vote, in order to participate in the national elections, you don't need any ID whatsoever. But on the other hand, they're all for pushing digital ID on everyone, you know, around the globe pretty much. So how does that even make sense?
Oh, it makes no sense whatsoever,
Yeah.
Christine. I mean, the way it makes sense is, this is what makes sense, is that there are people in this world who want to install a Chinese-style social credit
Yes.
system all over the world so they can control us. And so it's a combination of the digital ID where they can track everything about you and come up with a profile about whether you're with them or against them.
Yeah.
In China, it's called whether you're a trustworthy citizen or an untrustworthy citizen, okay?
Yeah.
So if you're with them, you're trustworthy, they give you freedom. If you oppose them, you're untrustworthy, and then they can do
Exactly.
things like...
And they put your picture up on the cinema
Well,
screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They
You
can do all
jaywalked.
kinds of things. Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, this is a social shaming in
It
China.
is. It
Okay,
is.
so and they can do things like if you're walking across the street, they have big screens with their face on it
Yeah.
saying untrustworthy
I
citizen.
know. I mean,
But-
in the old days, right? Like back in the medieval. I mean, they were presenting the people, you know, in these on the
In the
marketplace.
stocks, when
yeah.
yes.
You know,
Right, right.
It's
It's
exactly
modern
the
It's
same
a
stocks.
virtual business.
It's modern
exactly
stocks.
the same thing.
But the real danger is, and this is another part of the whole control grid that's being pushed in,
Yeah.
is central bank digital currencies.
Yeah.
Because when you combine a digital ID where you can identify somebody who is a dissident voice or whatever, and then you combine it with the central bank digital currency, that's where you can really trap them, because these things are programmable,
Yes.
meaning that they can, that the government is going to know everything about what who you're buying from, what you're buying, what the price is, and they can decide that you're not going to buy it.
Exactly.
I mean, it can also be attached to like a carbon footprint, so
Yes.
that if you have already flown
Yeah.
this year and so you used up
Yes.
your carbon credits, they won't allow you to buy another plane ticket.
Right.
So
Yeah, or I mean, you know, they can actually make you spend your money rather than putting it aside. You know,
True.
for
Well, the
I
money
mean,
can
just-
expire.
That's right.
Exactly.
If you don't spend it by
So,
Friday, it's just
exactly,
gone.
exactly. It's gone, or it will devalue, right? So yeah, it's just insane.
And that's a way of them keeping people dependent on the government. They don't want you to save.
Yes.
So
Yes.
you've got to spend your
Yes.
money so that
Yeah.
you will be vulnerable to
Yeah,
them
yeah.
when you're in need.
So Montgomery, let me ask you.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we've laid it out last night in the event. We were talking about here now. You know, the detrimental effect digital ID will ultimately have on our everyday lives, and how it will control people essentially. And it is being imposed by democratically elected governments, right? So what I'm hearing a lot of times when I speak to people about that, they simply say, well, but why should our government do that? I mean, we elected them and they're, doing what's best for us and they're looking out for our interest. How would you counter that?
Yeah, well, I think that I must say, and Andrew, I'd be curious also to get your feedback on this. I think the response in Britain was actually very good. I think actually that we didn't have much of that. There were naturally the usual kind of people that are just like, yes, well, if you've got nothing to hide kind of culture, which we know is just ridiculous. But ultimately, the reaction from the British public was complete rejection. Historically in England, this has been attempted before. So during the war, after the war, we had ID cards. Churchill scrapped them. He rolled them back because he said they're not British, right? That's not what we do. We don't believe in a papers, please culture. Fast forward to 2010, I believe.
Tony Blair wanted it in the noughties. He was pushing
Tony Blair
ID cards.
still is.
Yes.
So Tony Blair came forward and then pushed for ID cards. But again, we rolled them back. We got them taken away. But he's still the Tony Blair Institute, because we talk a lot about the World Economic Forum, or EU, and all of these sort of global entities. But the Tony Blair Institute has a huge amount of power behind our government. And they're the ones peddling huge amounts of the digital ID, especially at the level of money that is involved in this as well. So my response to that is, I'm quite optimistic, actually. Now, again, I appreciate your feedback on this, Andrew, would you say that because we had a U-turn, right? I think what was it, the 13th U-turn from our government, where they basically said, we're going to bring a mandated digital ID. They U-turned and then they took it away. But I think, call me a conspiracy theorist, but that could have, that aided the government in a sense, because it's made a lot of people feel almost complacent that this isn't a reality and it's not going to happen. And it was sort of a very clever tactic to bring it to the forefront, do a big song and dance, be like, digital ID is coming, we're going to pull it now, no one has to worry about it, because let's face it, we speak to most people now and they say, oh, well, I thought they U-turned on that, even though it's still coming through the back door. Right. So, I think that ultimately it's I'm going to not say responsibility, I'll copy what you said yesterday and say duty, instead, as much as responsibility, to do things like this, do as much outreach as possible and be a voice amongst our peers to basically push back against it. Because it's not just the digital ID, as it's been mentioned many times, it's little things, using cash, right? Or when you're at self-checkouts. I mean, London is turning into just, it's just this, an automated environment. Even coming here was an absolute nightmare. The amount of biometric processes you have to go through just to go abroad is insane. And I said to them, I don't want to do this, so we'll go home then. It's like,
that's right.
It's your choice. We're not forcing you to do it. You don't have to come here. So what we really need from governments is opt out and to ring fence those freedoms, just your rights to live offline. You tried to get a driving license. I went through the exact same process recently. I need to change the address on my license. Requires one login. So how do you go around this? Well, you have to go. You have to go to the post office. You have to send off. It's an absolute
only a certain post office, not every post office.
Really?
It was only a certain one. I had to drive. Yeah, it was a 20-mile round trip.
So who's going to do that? Just sign up to one login. It's convenient.
Yeah, I know. So I mean, that's exactly like the really despicable thing when they rolled out the digital green certificate, that COVID pass. Once again, it was, to keep us all healthy and our concern for public health and, the whole shebang. So, but how it actually started, I mean, that was an invention from the EU Commission. Ursula von der Leyen herself, Madam Corrupt, she came up with that idea, the EU Commission, right? So they introduced it into Parliament to get it passed. Or get it voted on. We don't actually pass these laws because we have nothing to say, absolutely nothing to say. It's just a democracy simulation, what we have here. So, we actually voted on it. But they rolled it out or introduced it as it was designed or it was meant to facilitate travel among the EU member states. Because, traveling...
You're in the Schengen area.
Traveling within the member states, right? That is one of the pillars of the EU, right? So they had to protect that. And, it was also to help the tourism industry because, they had really taken a strong hit in the year of 20, when no one was allowed to travel at all. So that was the purpose and the sole purpose at the time why that digital green certificate was being proposed to the chamber. And I remember I said in my speech, don't vote for this because they will turn it into a freedom and democracy voucher.
Yeah.
You know, it will actually be used to monitor the citizens, to restrict the citizens. And I would have loved to be wrong on this, but unfortunately, once again, I was right. So, but it's so despicable. And now they're, and that was pretty much, it wasn't about health. It wasn't about anything other than getting the people used to the fact that they had to show something wherever they went. And now they want to have to follow up with a digital ID, but on a much larger scale, right?
Papieren bitter.
I'm sorry, it's what?
Papieren bitter or
Oh,
whatever.
yeah, absolutely.
But I think it's, you've got to really trust, to give this much power to any entity, you'd have to have immense trust in them. And we're at a time after the COVID pandemic where the trust in governments around the world is at record level lows. It certainly is in the UK. We've never seen approval ratings as low as we've got for the current government. But as I said yesterday in the meeting, this is a one-way street. Once we bring digital ID in, it's there forever. And we don't know what government's going to be elected anywhere in the future. And they will have the power, and we haven't voted for
That's the argument. That is the fundamental
argument. You do not know where
this
is going.
It's when people want to argue, because you asked me about kind of democratic mandates. Well, I've got two solid responses to that. Number one is, it was never in the Labour's manifesto.
No.
It was never, ever put to the public, right? So no one ever voted for it anyway. And second of all is, when you do speak to the odd person, because they are around that like Labour, I found a few, they'll say, you know, well, I trust the government, and, you know, spot on response is like, okay, yeah, but do you trust, for example, Nigel Farage or Rupert, like anyone?
Well, the truth is, though, Monty, that it wasn't in Labour's manifesto because it wasn't in the Conservative manifesto either, but the Conservative government previously had done all the so-called consultation, and I think when it's a uni-party policy, they just don't talk about it. It was coming in, whoever won the election, it was coming in.
Right, and this is what people don't realize, is that this is a uni-party thing. It doesn't matter whether you're on the left or whether you're on the right. They have the pretext for anyone.
Exactly.
And another thing I know that is dear to your heart is the way that these digital IDs can be used in these so-called smart cities. Smart ghettos or stupid ghettos or whatever you want to call them.
15-minute ghettos.
15-minute ghettos. They depend on the digital ID to enforce that. Okay?
Of course.
So what are these 15-minute ghettos? You know, it's the vision is, or the way that they spin it is, oh, everybody will be able to be in their own community. You'll have everything you need, where you live, where you work, your doctor, your lawyer, your schools, everything is going to be 15-minute walk or bike ride from your home. And then what does that do? It gives them the ability with the digital IDs to basically quarantine you into a very small area. And of course, again, wait, let me just finish. So what does that do to people who are dissidents, right? What it does is they're tracking you through the digital ID to try to decide whether you are somebody that they like or don't like. And if you're somebody that they don't like, then you're trapped. You cannot get out.
And they don't need to put fences up, because if they've got a central bank digital currency, they just program it so your bank cards don't work outside of your sector.
That's
and they're bringing it in Oxford now.
I was just about to touch on that, but you go for
6 sectors. They're just carving a small city like Oxford into 6 sectors where you're allowed out of your sector so many times a year. And people are allowed in so many times, and then you get fined.
We have in North London, we have these things called LTNs, low traffic neighbourhoods. So they're blocking off the roads and bringing in cycle lanes, all under the idea of net zero, man-made climate change. And it's perfect. So you say they don't put literal fences up. Who knows at this point?
Well, let me touch. You just.
But when they put those low traffic neighbourhoods in, you see, obviously they just put posts across a road. When someone rings for an ambulance or a fire engine,
Yeah,
The
they
sat
ca-
navs haven't changed.
Yeah.
They
Yeah,
come
yeah.
up and they can't get through.
Yeah, that's true.
Exactly,
And it's
yeah.
actually uses more
Yeah,
fuel
yeah,
to get
yeah,
out of your
yeah.
area.
Yeah.
'cause
It's stupid. Yeah,
so it's
yeah,
not
yeah,
good for the
yeah.
environment.
But
It's about control.
You touched on something that I find interesting. You were talking about, the trust in government is at a record low. People no longer trust their governments, right? So
right.
what they have done in Germany actually to counter that is the secret state police called the Bundesverfassungsschutz, right? Who infamously have been watching us, right, to figure out whether or not
keep you safe.
Yeah, of course, or to keep us safe. So they came up with a new category as to what describes people that are anti-constitutional, and that category is delegitimization of the state, its institutions, and its representatives. So, in other words,
You're an enemy of the state.
if you are even criticizing your government, which I always kind of thought was the basis for a democracy in and of itself.
Normally how it works.
If you, criticize the government, then they can actually slap you with the label you're anti-constitutional and prosecute you accordingly, or ban you from, running for public office or whatever it is they come up with, right? So is there something, it's mind-boggling actually, the mind gymnastics they're having to do to come to that conclusion. So is there something similar in the UK or in the United States?
In the United States, under the Biden administration, a memo came out of I think it was some kind of an official memo inside of the Biden administration saying that, I think it was an FBI office or something, saying that traditional Latin Mass Catholics were potential threat actors. Okay, and the idea being that that administration was very, pro-abortion, very pro transgenderism, et cetera, and the traditional Latin Mass Catholics were people who would disagree with that, and they were trying to actually infiltrate. They were going to infiltrate the churches to try to figure out who are the leaders, et cetera. So then when that was exposed, a whistleblower exposed it, they, of course, disavowed it. But that it's a situation where people were being identified on the basis of their religion and then categorized as being potential threat actors. And when you get into that category in the United States, you lose a lot of your constitutional rights and possibly targeted by the government. So that is an example of that. And the way that ties into digital IDs is that with a digital ID, you can track everybody's social media posts. And then once you're a domestic threat actor, they can probably break into your email also.
Yeah, of course.
And just surveil every aspect of your life and then cut you off from your constitutional rights.
Yeah.
So fortunately, when President Trump was elected, he got rid of all of that.
Good.
But but like we've been saying, we don't know who's going to be the next person. We don't want to be putting in an infrastructure where there could be another person that would do the same thing.
Implement it again.
Yeah.
Monty, what does it look like in the UK? What kind of things have they done there to make sure that the people don't say the wrong things?
God, how long you got? Well, I think fundamentally it's we've got a record high cases of arrests for social media posts. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
12,000 a year.
12,000
Yeah.
The highest in the world.
Yeah, I mean,
And we're not got the world's biggest population, have we?
No.
Yeah, and so I would fundamentally say that is the core attack on free speech. I mean, you've got young people that are kind of younger than me having police knock at the door saying what they've said is whatever, racist or hateful. And, and even in the public arena, I do a lot of street work, and I just recently I was having a debate with some university students about how if you're transgender, you are mentally ill. Funny that. I mean, and that's not an attack on trans people. That's to say that that's actually a kindness and a recognition. They need help.
Yes.
What was happened is the police were called on me, and you can find the footage on my X or whatever. But the police just simply turned around and said, "Well, we've had a call to say that you have been offensive." So we're going to have to seize all of your banners. You're placed under investigation. And you'll have to come back to Liverpool, which is miles away from my house, for a voluntary interview.
Yeah,
if you don't go, they'll knock on your door and drive you up there anyway. And, you know, who knows, probably nothing will come from that. The point is, it's the process is the punishment, okay?
Right.
If the chances are this is going to get thrown out. But I was arrested, what was it, like last year at a Pride demonstration stating the same thing. I was banned from the centre of London, which is Westminster. I wasn't allowed in, and I was told I have to live and sleep at my home address, all for stating that to be trans is to be mentally ill. This is what we're dealing with. You touched on it beautifully yesterday. I don't think people quite recognise the threats of freedom that are in Britain, the threat to freedom there is in Britain.
The Labour government
terrifying.
have announced that they've set up departments in government to monitor dissident posts on social media. I mean, they've got teams of 80 civil servants, and their only job is to monitor what people say and report them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, we had the same case in Germany, right? The former Minister of Economics, and then, he was it was a reference made to him as being a moron, a Schwachkopf, right? It was like a meme from a company.
That's probably being mean to morons.
Yeah,
though,
but I
isn't
mean, it was Stefan Niehoff, a pensioner, he only had shared it, right? That meme, and he was, 6 o'clock in the morning. The police showed up and had a search warrant for his house. Totally insane because he shared a meme that pretty much said Habeck is a Schwachkopf, a moron. I cannot see any insult in that. To me, it was a rather accurate description of his character.
The way supposedly our democracies work. I mean, if we didn't have the majority of people in the country were critical of the current government, you'd never have a change of government,
of course,
would you?
exactly.
How could you ever have a change of government?
Exactly, and that's the whole point. If people no longer feel that elections will actually affect change, what are they supposed to do? Just sit back and say, I guess we can't change
they want to get us to the point where it doesn't matter who you vote for, the government always get in.
Exactly.
Well, or the current government wants to stay in forever, and that's why they're installing this right now.
Of course.
So that it will never be able to change.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, anyway, I guess this pretty much wraps it up. Thank you for joining on the screens. Thank you for being here.
It's been a pleasure.
And we need to fight digital ID. The event, I'm going to post that on my social media.
A threat without borders.
That's good.
I'm going to post that on social media as well. You might want to check it out. There was a lot of information on what it actually means once digital ID has been implemented and rolled out. And always remember, in a state where the citizens know everything about their government, that is what you call a democracy. A state, however, where the government knows everything about the citizen, that is what you call a tyranny. Let's never get to that point. Thank you so much for tuning in. See you next time. Bye.